So about a year ago, I took one of my ideas for an animated series and turned it instead into a D&D campaign. And I served as the DM for the first time in my life. I played a couple rounds of D&D before that as just a player, but decided, what the heck, got this idea, I'm gonna do something with it, and I'm gonna jump in and just try this. In this episode, I'm going to talk a little bit more about what I learned from being a DM for the first time on these campaigns. Hopefully that'll kind of inspire you to maybe jump in and DM for the first time if you've just been a TTRPG player up to this point, or if you're still hesitant about taking one of your story ideas and you're thinking about it from a perspective of the written word, like a novel, or maybe a TV show or a movie. Maybe this will help you think about other ways, other formats that you could tell the story. My main problem that I got hung up on was this idea was meant for an animated series. So it was meant to be visual. You're meant to sit back and watch it. And that was really hard for me to get over that, because that was just how I saw the story. I didn't think about it any other way, in any other medium. So I was pretty locked into viewing it this way and telling this story specifically in a visual way. But I learned from running these campaigns with some friends that the power of the human imagination is a pretty big deal. Even though it was all theater of the mind kind of style, we were able to tell the story, and I was able to provide enough detail to help paint the picture of what the world was like. Okay, so this is like a semi-futuristic cyberpunk kind of setting. So lots of, not far future, but maybe near future technological advancements, some robots, AI, that kind of thing. Through running this, I feel like I was able to get a good grasp of describing what it looked like without having to rely on visual aids. But I did use some AI art to kind of help myself visualize certain locations and NPCs, and also just to help show the players kind of the general area of what it looked like beyond just the verbal description. I didn't think it would work, but I was surprised to find that I feel like it did pretty well. Like everybody's brain was in the same place in understanding and imagining this world. We had some background music at some points as well to kind of help create the mood, just kind of playing a little quietly in the background. But I feel like all of that combined together really helped visually tell the story. Kind of connected to that is I also had a very specific design aesthetic for the story. I was thinking very much like 80s inspired synthwave, so like very 80s fonts, neon colors. And so before the actual first game we played, I created a little, I guess you call it like a handout that I made in Canva, kind of a breakdown of the story, a summary, as well as character pages, introducing players to their characters, a little bit of backstory and personality and that kind of thing at each one. So creating that and presenting that to players before the actual game, I feel like also helped at least a little bit visually kind of set the tone and the aesthetic of what this world feels like and looks like. So if you have a story that you're working on that's in a similar vein where it's a very specific style or aesthetic or maybe genre, you might want to create a couple of visual aids before your actual game to at least help reinforce some of that style and let players know this is kind of the general vibe of this world or the story to get them immersed into it. And you may need to use some help from some AI generated art. I use Night Cafe mainly because it's free. That helped me to kind of create some NPC art as well as a couple of vistas of like cityscapes and that kind of thing to help with certain locations. This can be especially helpful for you if you're stuck in a very visual mode of thinking about your story. Getting it out on paper, so to speak, in the form of an image can help you visualize something specific yourself, but also being able to show that to players to help them with their imagination as well. So back to the characters. I had created pre-created characters for these campaigns. Reason being is with the story, there's a set main characters that push this plot forward. It didn't feel right to just let players make up their own characters for this. But for this particular story and world, I felt like I needed to translate the actual characters that I created from that into this game. So I created basic parameters for players to use, basic character art, the kind of background, class, and a couple of other helpful things to know about them. I basically let players run the show with their characters. They had the freedom to build their character sheets however they wanted, and the freedom to just interpret that character however they wanted. They chose which ones they wanted to play, and they were able to take that in the direction that they felt like they wanted to go. So I didn't want it to feel rigid, like you have to play this character this exact way. I wanted them to have this freedom of knowing that they could take the parameters that I provided and run with it and make the character their own, however they wanted to do that. And so they did. And I think they did a great job. And that was one thing I was really impressed with and excited about, is they all kind of brought their own interpretation to the characters along the way. And that was really cool to see these characters I had visualized in my head and them coming to life in this game. And, for some of these characters, the players came up with little tiny details to add that I had never thought of. And after playing through, I realized, man, I should take that, or at least maybe not literally, but maybe as inspiration and come up with something like that myself. There was one character I didn't really have a whole lot of well thought out backstory quite yet. But one of the players who was playing that character was able to come up with some of their own ideas of what this character's past was like, and that kind of translated into how they played the character in the game. And that was really cool to see, and it's really helpful for me. But it was fantastic. I loved seeing everybody's ideas that they brought to the table and the way that they portrayed their characters. It was really cool to see them come to life in fresh ways that I hadn't thought of before. So if you're adapting your story into a TTRPG game, you'll need to decide if you want to let players just create their own characters for this world and the story that you've made, or if you're going to give them pre-created characters. And if you do go that last route, you need to decide, do you want it to be super rigid, as in like they have to play this character this way and you've made all the decisions for them? Or do you want to have a little bit of leeway there where players can bring their own interpretation to the table? Personally, I found that the latter was a lot more fun, but that's up to you and how you want this to come across. Just don't be too tight-fisted with your characters. Give away some creative freedom to players and people who are collaborating with you, and you might be surprised. Maybe you'll come across some totally new ideas that never hit you before. One of the things I really enjoyed about the games that we played with this story is that D&D, and I guess TTRPG as a whole, was a great way for me to test drive ideas and like beta test stuff. For our first one-shot that we played as kind of like our introductory game into this, I took a half-baked plot idea and adapted it for a TTRPG game, but it allowed me to really test drive this idea that I hadn't really thought through completely in terms of like it involved a specific setting and involved a specific villain, some of that kind of stuff. But that was very helpful to be able to kind of test this out and say, hey, in this setting, would this work in a separate medium for storytelling? The same is true for some of the mini campaigns we did after that. Is I took existing ideas I had and just kind of adapted them and test drove them. I had ideas for certain characters, certain villains, and I put them in there to kind of test drive, mostly for myself, to see how they were received and how it worked. But I was able to beta test the stuff in a low commitment environment where it was okay if it fell flat or people didn't respond well to it or didn't like it. It was okay. And so if you have stories that you're developing and you want to test drive them and you want to experiment with translating them into different mediums, different formats, having one, such as a role-playing game, something that's low commitment for you can really help you think through some of your ideas and even test drive them to see, what works and what doesn't, what resonates with players or collaborators and how that goes down. And you might be surprised. You might find yourself getting a whole load of new ideas that you hadn't thought of in terms of plots or maybe characters or little story elements that you didn't consider before. And this can be a great way for you to just play around, have fun, experiment, try things, see what works and what doesn't. And if you really want to know if it's working or not working, you can always talk to your players afterward and ask them, hey, what did you think of this villain? Did you like them? Were they boring or lame, flat, whatever? Did you like this plot twist? Was that fun for you? If you play with a handful of players in this way, you can have access to your own little like beta testing group where you can get feedback on story elements before you commit to really fully developing it. I'm talking about all this as if you're adapting your story, like your novel idea or whatever, to an RPG game, assuming that you're going to be the DM or GM, depending on what game you're playing, running the game. Now, it's not for everyone. Not everybody wants to be a GM. I really enjoyed running the game and collaborating with players and bringing the story to life. So you might find that too, that maybe you've wanted to play an RPG game before, but you've always been a player, or maybe you just even haven't gotten your foot wet in that kind of stuff. You can jump in with very little knowledge and still have a great time, especially if you're playing with people who are more experienced than you. They can help you along the way to prepare and get ready. So it's okay if you feel like, I don't know what I'm doing. That's totally okay. Anyway, this is just a few things I learned from running my first D&D game, taking one of my existing story ideas and translating it into a TTRPG campaign. Maybe you're in the same boat as me, as you have lots of story ideas and you just want to find ways of telling them and publishing them and putting them out there. An RPG game can be a great way to do that and test drive a lot of ideas you might be sitting on. What's been your experience so far playing RPG games? Have you just been a player, a DM, GM, or is this a totally foreign world to you? Feel free to drop me a comment and let me know.